Hey, welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Kemmler, and my next guests are the filmmakers behind the new explosive genre, political allegory, art house beauty, and all-around amazing film, Bacurau. In it, a small Brazilian village rich with history reveals itself to not be quite what it seems. And honestly, that's all I'll say. I'm extremely happy to have with me the team behind Bacurau, Kleber Mendonça and Juliano Dornelles. Guys, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Did I get those? I got it, right? Did I get them right? Got the name? Okay, good.
Actually, it's Juliano, not Juliano.
Juliano.
Yes.
First and foremost, 10 years it took to make this movie, correct? Or at the very least, like, just thinking about it and getting it to the place where you wanted?
Yeah, 10 years, because sometimes ideas, they take some time to mature, and we, of course, got involved with other films. I made Neighboring Sounds, my first feature, and then I made Aquarius. We worked together in these two films and many other projects, and we had children. Juliano made his own films, and then slowly we kept coming back to this idea to develop it, to write the script, and it took 10 years.
Can I ask what the original idea was, and when along the way you found genre elements, or started figuring out that was the best way to sort of conceptualize the idea?
We always wanted to make a film like this. We always discussed the possibility of exploring the genre cinema in Brazil, because we don't have a big tradition in our country for genre cinema. We had Coffin Joe, one of the most important filmmakers in the South Hemisphere, but it was only him at the time.
He actually passed 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. So we always had this desire, and in 2009, Brazil was a very different country. We were talking a lot about representation and how people from those isolated areas are represented in journalism and the media and in teledramaturgy. So we started to think about a film that could be some kind of response to this, in our minds, wrong representation. So it started like that. So it developed a lot because the world has changed a lot, and especially here and especially in Brazil. Yeah, so it's a very close connection that we always had to the American cinema, to the love for genre cinema made in United States, also in Italia and also in Australia. So yeah, it's a lot of things all together.
It's interesting that people label it genre. There's clear homages and references too, but at the same time, the violence to me doesn't feel hokey or played for comic effect the way that I think American genre films, specifically now do. When the violence erupts in this movie, it's abrasive and it's immediate and it's graphic. But again, I wasn't cheering or giggling the way that I do with someone like, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, the way that I do at the end of a Tarantino movie. There was something horrific about this that felt steeped in history, which I think was the intention, right?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge in Bacurau was to make a genre film. I mean, for all practical purposes, this is a Western, and then it has some elements of sci-fi. It takes place a few years from now. But of course, we always knew that it would get violent at some point. So how to show this violence, how to shoot the violence, and we always thought that towards the end of the film, we would not have some kind of celebration of all the stuff that happens in the film. It would actually come with this very kind of hard feeling about brutality and violence, because the film is very much about, the film is guided by elements that come from history, invasions and wars. And we thought a lot about the Canudos War in Brazil in the late 19th century, which was basically genocide. We thought about the Vietnam War. We thought about many armed confrontations and, of course, Westerns. And so, yeah, the challenge is how to make violence hurt in a film and not make it just fun device to make the film more entertaining. So it's quite a challenge the way you choose how to shoot it.
How did you get your actors on board? I'd imagine if you say, as you said, there isn't really a rich genre history in Brazil. What sort of conversations did you have? Did they generally understand what you were going for with the script as soon as they read it?
Yeah, by talking to the actors, we never had this idea to, we are doing a genre film. It's not like that. We just we are making a film, a normal film, and but
this isn't really a normal film.
It's not a normal film, but we just didn't want to put them in some kind of state of mind, the conversations were always about their characters, and we gave some references to it. We discussed a lot about the story. It's very clear for us. It was always very clear to them our intentions and the necessity of making a film about a community. With no protagonists, everybody has its own, their own importance, and that was something that we discussed since the beginning. If you only have 30 seconds of time in the film, it should be memorable. So that's how I think that we discussed with them, and we had these 3 levels of casting in the film. We had those extras that had been not treated by like extras, people that we met in the nearby locations, and we had a lot of time to preparation with them. So that there is these people, wonderful people that we met, professional actors from Brazil, from United States, from England, and many different regions from Brazil, and the 2 stars, Sônia Braga and Udo Kier. So it was like a soup ensemble of many interesting faces and personalities.
When it comes to the villagers and the townspeople in the film, they are layered and complex. They are obviously, as a whole, the protagonist of the movie, but each one of them, you learn more about them, even if they are a small part. And that is such a hard thing to do in a genre film, right? Most genre films you see, they just don't have time. They don't know how to have time to give a character that much depth. The character is just there to serve a purpose of some kind, whether it's to be the goofball or whether it's to sort of be the hero or to sort of be the one person who's like, I don't know if we should do this. Whereas with this, Sônia Braga's character alone appears one way, turns out a different way, and then turns out a completely different way. And that happens with multiple characters.
Yeah, the trick is to have a character enter a scene and you actually feel that he or she has a life outside that scene. Because usually it happens a lot in some films. The character comes in and it feels like he or she was created just to be in that particular scene. So we had an amazing... we just fell in love with so many amazing faces and that we found, young and old. There is Kawan is a little boy who's in the film, and he has 2 lines in the film, and everybody remembers the 2 lines. So it's a very particular mix of faces and personality and the human situations that we wrote into the script, which apparently they work.
Did you find while you were doing, and of course, I mean, this may be why it takes 10 years, is because it is actually much more difficult to craft a movie with layered, complex characters like that, because if you have one big idea, or a scene is one big idea, the small ideas can take away from that, and how do you fit them in, and how do you make that work rather than just sticking to the big idea? Do you ever think about that or worry about that, or does it feel much more organic while you're creating?
I think it was very organic, yes. We had, as we said before, we had a lot of time to discuss those ideas and many...
And get rid of the bad ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, even just the sense that they have technology and know how to use it, and that they're much more aware of what's happening than I think
I think we always, I mean, from the get-go, we had this idea that the community would be part of the world, not outside the world.
Exactly.
They're actually separated from the world through man-made problems, you know, politics and the economy. But in terms of knowing what's happening, they know exactly what's happening. And this is something that we discussed extensively, me and Juliano, during the writing script, the script writing process.
Discussing sort of how connected they were versus disconnected.
They would always be very connected. In fact, there is something with a UFO in the film, and we just talked about this before we should.
Don't spoil it.
I won't spoil it, but there is something about a UFO and which finds an interesting piece of information coming from one of the villages, and that was one of the ideas that we discussed extensively. Yeah.
What westerns were you mostly looking? I mean, you have curated a series that's gonna start on Friday at Lincoln Center.
We're very proud of that. Yeah.
Yeah, you should be. The list of movies on there is phenomenal. But I'm curious what westerns, because I can't remember which western is in that series, if there is one. But what westerns you were looking at when you were writing this?
Well, we can talk about the filmmakers. We had Sergio Leone in the film. We have Sam Peckinpah in the film. We have John Ford in the film. We have Glauber Rocha that made Brazilian westerns in the 60s from the time of the Cinema Novo. So it's a lot of great people, great artists that we carry with us for many, many years. It's a film of two cinephiles that just love genre cinema, and I think the Hollywood cinema has a very important part on that. And yeah, but one thing that is important, that this film is supposed to be some kind of revisionist western, not like the classic westerns from the 40s or the 50s, where the Indians were the invaders, you know. Yeah. So this is more like the westerns made in the 70s. Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when we discuss references, the cinephile or the film critic expects you to give a full list of very mathematical
it's difficult.
references. I mean, it's not like we got tracing paper and went to the monitor and traced a shot.
Have that right now?
No.
What a letdown. Sorry, guys. That's what I brought you here for. Was that?
No,
list.
but at the same time, it's a beautiful thing, because some of the films that we discussed, they ended up consciously in the film, and then some of the films that we never discussed, they ended up in the film anyway. And then, you know, through the process of editing the film and showing the film and traveling with the film, we came to realize that so many other films made their way into the film without us knowing, and that's a great thing. That's what we try to do with the selection at the Lincoln Center.
So when you went back and watched the film, maybe after having just completed it or while you were completing it, you started noticing your favorite filmmakers in ways that subconsciously kind of filtered through?
We discovered in the editing room.
Out, Sam Peckinpah's
a moment very similar to Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, but we never discussed, actually. Yeah. And then suddenly it was there.
Well, that happens, right? You're writing and you're like, oh, geez, I'm writing this scene from my favorite movie. I have to go back and make it less like that.
I'm
right?
channeling Joyce now.
Yeah. You know, I don't know much about Brazilian history. Forgive me. I'm an American. I only know American history. That's all they teach us. But I read that the village, it wasn't initially supposed to be a town that was made up originally of people who were slaves, but you found that while researching it and decided to sort of to change the town to be that. Is that true?
We like
some idea that we had, but we never put it on the film. It's not in the film.
We like the idea that Bacurau was a quilombo, but we never actually mentioned the word quilombo in the film. The quilombo was a very a village where slaves ran away. They ran away from the coast, and they went into the sertão region, and they founded some outposts where they would basically get together and survive.
Just to understand, in Brazil, we had this very long coast, very large coast, and it was there that the slaves were used to work on the sugarcane plantations. So going out of the coast, they should have many very hard places to live, but at the same time, nobody lived there at that moment. You know, so that's why they run to the inner country.
Create towns for themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
When did the idea?
The spirit of resistance started in Brazil. Started in those places, I think.
When did the idea for this sort of idea of the imperialist army take shape in terms of what they were actually going to be within the context of the movie? Because obviously they represent something else and a bigger idea, but within the context of the movie, what they're up to is kind of comical in a way.
I think we discussed history, World War II, the war in Serbia, the Vietnam War, the way that the United States got involved with Vietnam, and the way that France,
Afghanistan.
well, yeah, and all the others. But
Yeah.
In Vietnam, it was a very specific situation. The French had been in Vietnam. The French used to call it Indochine. So that whole conflict was extremely rich in terms of the violence and politics and a certain arrogance in terms of having a lot of equipment and not really finding out interesting information about the people from that particular region and the history of that particular region. So all these things informed us in terms of writing the script and coming up with the invaders who happen to be American and European. Yeah.
Let's not forget about Asterix. We discussed a lot about Asterix,
the
that French
Asterix
comic book about the conflict between the Gauls and the Romans 2,000 years ago. So yeah,
and they have the magic potion, which makes them strong, and so there's a lot of Asterix in Bacurau. Yeah.
There's
some kind of magic potion in.
There's a scene in the midst of the movie, and obviously because people haven't seen it yet, I'm presenting some of this stuff without context, but I'll keep going. It's when Udo Kier is called a Nazi by someone, and it's this idea that I feel like we see all the time culturally, at least here, which is that it doesn't matter how horrible the thing is that you are doing. If you are called some word that you don't like, that is, that is the deal breaker in a way. Like morality begins there in some way. Can you talk about that scene a little bit and writing that? I'm assuming it kind of came from a little bit from that place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bacurau is full of moments when identity is really questioned. The villagers behave the way that they are not expected to behave. And then there are two Brazilian characters who come into the village from the outside, and then they do things that you don't really expect them to do. And once they go back to the compound, the tables are turned, and once again you have all these this role playing which is denied in terms of what you expect. And then the Udo scene is very much about the use of blatant cliches to insult someone, but based on history and based on culture. So you really have to see the film to get the full context. But
it reminds me of when, in this country, when a political leader of some kind is pushing forward racist policies, and someone says, "Hey, you're racist," and they say, "I am not like, don't you call me a racist?" Like that's the worst thing that could possibly happen to them, even though the policies that they are presenting are racist policies in a lot of ways. I don't know if that was meant to be the allegory in some way.
I think it's a similar situation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course. We have this kind of political in Brazil right now.
Yeah.
In the power.
Yeah, you have what we have, which is a leader that thrives on being called racist, I think, in a lot of ways, right? When it comes to casting Udo Kier, there's obviously like a huge body of work in B movies and in art house films. Was that something that when you approached him, you were thinking about it? Like, oh, as soon as people see Udo Kier, they'll have an idea where this is going in some way?
Combination of different elements. Yeah, well, yes,
Yeah, makes sense what you're saying.
I'll go along with you, but it also I also happened to meet him at the Palm Springs Film Festival, and of course I'm a huge fan of Udo Kier, and I immediately sent a message with a photograph, with him to Juliano, and we began to dream of the possibility of having him in the film. But he's one of the best human beings we've ever met, and he's a friend now. And
I heard he took Sônia Braga out on a date.
he took her on a date with a suit,
a bakery
in Parelhas in the state.
Wearing a suit in that heat.
The little town, the town that welcomed us, and he's such an amazing person. We had only amazing people in this film. So lucky,
Yeah, I feel like you kind of have to have that for the type of shoot that I'm sure you had. I'm sure it wasn't an easy shoot, right?
You're right. We were very lucky. Udo came for 18 days.
How long was the entire shoot?
8 weeks and a half, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Our week, we count 5 days of shooting and 1 day resting. So 5-1. So
it's, I mean, it felt like 6 months. It's a lot of work, and it's physical work.
Because for you to understand, we sleep in that bigger town. 20,000 people live there, but the main location, we had to go inside the truck and get there for 1.5 hours of a dirty road. It was completely every day.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
Were you able to? Sorry, that no one's going to care about this but me. But were you able to sort of keep your staging in the town, or did you have to take all the equipment down and restage every day?
Oh
no,
we were very lucky. We could turn the little village of Bacurau into a studio, so we had all the equipment was always there, and
that's good.
we had an amazing.
Otherwise, it would be impossible.
Yeah, you don't have to.
We had an amazing relationship with the village, and it was a fantastic experience.
We talked briefly about how you shot the violence and its impact. Outside of that, the way that you shot action and violence was always surprising to me. There was never a focus on what I think most filmmakers would focus on or feel like they had to cover. There was the film gets violent, but at the same time, there's just allusions to violence at other points rather than the actual violence that is being committed. How plotted out was that beforehand, and what was the intention behind how you would shoot the violence like that?
I think, at least for me, it's really about, when I make a film, it's really about the desire to shoot a specific scene. We wrote some scenes in the script, which we finally decided that maybe we shouldn't shoot that scene because it would just go through the motions of a kind of normal. For example, a shootout scene in a Western. I mean, it's wonderful, but you have somebody shooting from one side and somebody shooting from the other side, and then somebody falls off a roof. It's fine. I mean, it's a Western, ooh, and then falls off with the Wilhelm scream. But then we decided not to go for that. So we came up with different ideas for different scenes, and that's what you see in the film. So the scenes you see in the film, we really wanted to shoot. And those are the ones we had the desire to shoot.
And I suspect that's why you didn't feel the violence as entertaining.
Yes.
That's maybe this is the reason, because we always wanted to have this feeling about violence, that violence is ugly and destructive and and bad. So yeah.
Or even not even that it just wasn't entertaining, but that when you would cut away from the violence, it would be, I mean, there is a moment of horrific graphic violence, and then you kind of expect with a movie like this that we're just going to be plunging into horrific graphic violence for the next 30, 40 minutes. But you have that one moment, and then you start removing us from it in different ways, sort of knocking us off our balance of what the movie could be.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
But
I mean it as a compliment.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. It's very interesting because it came as a surprise when we started showing the film, especially when the film premiered in Cannes in May last year. And then we began to get a lot of reactions, like the film is hyper-violent and super-violent. And me and Julian, we were very surprised. We still are. We were in the UK last week, and we saw the British print, which opens with the British Board of Classification certificate, which is a big 18 in red. And under the 18, it says strong bloody violence and gore, which is like a spoiler. I mean, we built the whole thing so carefully. It's like, so it begins as a rural drama for like half an hour and 35 minutes, and then we put elements into place, and then slowly you get into the story, and then bang, something happens.
I mean, you have a pretty clear foreshadowing at the top of the movie, though.
Yeah, but slowly, kind of,
Yeah.
putting the pieces on the table and and then they just spoil it with this almost like a warning, which is about it's too late because the guy has already paid for the ticket.
But it's great because when you go to see a film, you just you had some information about it, and you start to expect something, and someone come to you and pull off your carpet,
the rug,
the
rug
rug,
on your feet.
yeah, and that's great. And this is about having a good experience to go to a movie, for me at least. If I had this information, a strong bloody violence in the beginning, and I see a film that takes 40 minutes to start to talk about the plot, it's like we take a lot of time to see things happening, and you've made a lot of many other discoveries during this trajectory. So yeah, it's about having a surprising experience. It's good.
We have a question from Twitter. It's what advice could you give to aspiring directors just starting out?
That's a very good question. Just write, be yourself, and watch a lot of films and read books, which tell you something. But first and foremost, write and show it to your friends and get an idea of how good it is or how bad it is, and that's
What do you do when it's bad?
I restart, or I tell my friends that they might be wrong.
You start by telling them that they're wrong, and then 2 days later you restart because they might have been
That's
right.
exactly you got it. That's what it happens. But friends are very important. You show it to friends.
That's what I was about to say. We always talk to people like, if you have real friends, you're not making bad movies. Because
less likely, yeah.
But if you need to be a little smart to understand how your good friends will react to something, to make your own mathematics. How to. Yeah. So this is something that is difficult to teach, but you're going to feel it if you start to write, to do. And
there's a difference between like, oh, that's not clear enough and doesn't make sense to you. I get that. Exactly. Versus like, oh, you don't like that because it's just really not your style.
Yeah, exactly. You know all about that person, so it's important. So it's the other thing is to for me it's to be true to yourself. You not trying to talk about some things that you don't quite understand very well.
Don't try to please anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Start to be concerned. Be worried about you. You need to please you before the others. I think this is a good advice.
Be true to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find having made Bacurau, and it is technically a genre film. I mean I think it is lovingly a genre film in a lot of ways. American financiers, Hollywood always says that they love genre films. Is there a part of you that would make a movie in the Hollywood system? Is there anything about that interests you at this point, or?
I'm a filmmaker, and if I fall in love with a project, I'll make it anywhere I can. But having said that, of course, making a film within the system is very tough. So you got to have kind of a very thick skin to go into a situation like that. But I'm very curious. I think Juliano is also, well, you can speak for yourself, but...
No, but I would say the same thing, yeah.
Well, guys, I love the film. I'm so happy you came here to talk to me about it. It opens this weekend, right?
Yes.
Is it this weekend?
Well-
And then there's also a series that you guys have curated that is at Lincoln Center.
Mapping Bacurau.
Mapping Bacurau. Thank you so much for being here, guys.
Thank you very
Congratulations
much.
on
It was
the
a
movie.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
was a pleasure.